I was standing in my kitchen on a regular Thursday morning, flipping pancakes for Sophie and Jacob, when I heard the knock at my door. It was sharp, insistent, not the friendly tap of a neighbor. When I opened it, my world tilted sideways. There stood Natalie, my daughter, after 10 years of absolute silence. She wore an expensive navy suit, her hair perfectly styled, and beside her stood a stern man in gray carrying a briefcase. Her words came out cold as winter rain. "Hello, Mother. This is my attorney, Gerald Thompson. We're here to discuss the kidnapping charges I'm filing against you. You took my children." The word kidnapping hung in the air between us like poison. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Behind me, I heard Sophie's small voice asking who was at the door, and my heart just about shattered into a million pieces. But let me take you back 10 years, because that's where this nightmare really began. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I remember it was one of those bright spring days where you could finally feel winter loosening its grip on Ohio. I was home, doing laundry in my little apartment, when Natalie showed up with Sophie and Jacob. Sophie was only 4 years old then, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Jacob was 6, all elbows and knees and endless energy. Natalie looked terrible that day. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking as she held onto Jacob's shoulder. She told me she had a job interview, something important she couldn't miss, and she needed me to watch the kids for just an hour, maybe 2 at most. I'd helped her before, of course. That's what mothers do. That's what grandmothers do. So I said yes, kissed her cheek, and told her good luck. She rushed out so fast she forgot Jacob's inhaler on my kitchen counter. I picked it up, thinking I'd run it out to her car, but by the time I got to the window, she was already gone. Sophie and Jacob settled in quickly. We played with blocks. I made them grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup. We watched cartoons. The afternoon stretched into evening. I called Natalie's cell phone around 5 o'clock. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again at 6. Same thing. By 7, when I was putting dinner on the table, I started to feel that cold knot of worry in my stomach. The kids kept asking when Mommy was coming back. I told them soon, real soon, even though I didn't know if that was true. I put them to bed in my room, Sophie curled up like a little shrimp, and Jacob sprawling across the mattress like a starfish. I sat up all night in my living room chair, calling Natalie's number over and over, listening to it ring and ring and ring into nothing. 2 days passed, then 3, then a week. I called the police, filed a missing person report. They took my information, told me they'd look into it, but their faces said what their mouths didn't. Adults have a right to disappear if they want to. I called every hospital within 100 miles. Nothing. I tracked down Natalie's friends, the few I knew about. Nobody had heard from her. Finally, I went to her apartment. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Mr. Patterson, told me she'd cleared out 3 days before she dropped the kids off. Took everything, left the keys on the counter, paid through the end of the month and vanished. That's when I understood. This wasn't an emergency. This wasn't some terrible accident. Natalie had planned this. She'd abandoned her children with me, and she wasn't coming back. I was 54 years old. I worked part-time as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary School, barely making enough to cover my rent and bills. My apartment was tiny, just 1 bedroom. I had no legal paperwork, no custody agreement, nothing in writing. I had 2 traumatized children asking for their mother every single night, and I had no idea what to tell them. But what choice did I have? They were my grandchildren. They were blood. You don't turn your back on family. So I made it work. I gave up my small apartment and found a 3-bedroom rental house on Maple Street. It was older, needed work, but it had a yard and enough space for all of us. I took on extra hours at work. I budgeted every single penny. I learned how to braid Sophie's hair and help Jacob with his math homework and cook dinners that stretched across 3 days. Sophie started kindergarten that fall. Jacob went into 2nd grade. I went to every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game. I became their mother, in every way that mattered. Even though legally I was still just their grandmother. They started calling me Grandma, though sometimes, late at night when one of them was sick or scared, they'd slip and call me Mom. Each time it happened, my heart broke and healed all at once. The years passed. 1 became 2, became 5, became 10. The kids barely remembered Natalie anymore. When they asked about her, which wasn't often, I told them their mother had been sick and couldn't take care of them, but she'd loved them very much. I never told them the truth. I wanted to protect them from that pain. I never formally adopted them. The lawyer fees were thousands of dollars I didn't have. And besides, I thought Natalie was gone forever. Why would she come back after all this time? My savings disappeared. My retirement fund got drained. But I never regretted a single dollar, a single sleepless night, a single sacrifice. These children were my purpose, my joy, my whole world. During that first week after Natalie left, I'd gone back to her empty apartment one final time. There was mail stacked up by the door, letters and bills the landlord hadn't bothered with yet. I took it with me, thinking maybe there'd be a clue about where she'd gone. Most of it was junk, but there was one envelope marked Urgent, legal documents. I opened it, read what was inside, and my hands started shaking. I'd put that envelope in a shoebox in the back of my bedroom closet, thinking maybe I'd need it someday. Then years passed, and I honestly forgot it was there. Now, standing at my door 10 years later, watching Natalie's cold eyes sweep over me, I was suddenly back in the present moment. Gerald Thompson pushed past me into my house without asking permission. Natalie followed, looking around her childhood home, like she was evaluating its worth. Sophie and Jacob came down the stairs, drawn by the commotion. They stopped halfway down when they saw the strangers in our living room. Jacob, 16 now and tall, put his arm protectively around 14-year-old Sophie. "Grandma, who is that?" Jacob asked, his voice wary. Natalie's face crumpled into an expression of performed grief so perfect it could have won an award. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Baby," she said, her voice breaking. "It's me. It's your mother." The confusion on my grandchildren's faces was like watching glass shatter in slow motion. Sophie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jacob's arm tightened around his sister's shoulders, and I saw his jaw clench the way it did when he was trying to be brave. "I don't understand," Sophie whispered. Gerald Thompson set his briefcase on my coffee table, like he owned the place, and pulled out a thick folder of documents. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that made lies sound like truth. "Mrs. Clementine, I represent Natalie Harrison, the biological mother of Sophie and Jacob Harrison. We're here to address a very serious matter." I found my voice, though it shook. "You need to leave. You can't just barge into my home and—" "This is exactly the aggressive behavior we've documented," Gerald interrupted, making a note on his legal pad. "Mrs. Clementine, 10 years ago, you took custody of these children without legal authorization. You have been harboring minors without parental consent. That constitutes kidnapping under Ohio law." "Kidnapping?" The word exploded out of me. "She left them. She abandoned them. I raised them because she ran away and never looked back." Natalie sobbed louder. She was good at this. I had to give her that. She sank onto my couch like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. "I was sick, Mother. I had a breakdown. I was hospitalized. You knew I was vulnerable, and you took advantage. You disappeared with my babies while I was getting help." "That's a lie. That's an absolute lie, and you know it." Gerald held up his hand. "Mrs. Clementine, we have documentation. Missing person reports that Miss Harrison filed. Witness statements from individuals who saw you take the children. Medical records showing Miss Harrison was indeed in treatment during that time period." My head was spinning. What missing person reports? What witnesses? None of that happened. "You filed no custody paperwork," Gerald continued, his voice cutting through my protests like a knife. "No legal guardianship, no formal adoption. You simply kept someone else's children without permission for a decade. The fact that you provided care during that time doesn't give you legal rights." Jacob spoke up then, his voice sharp with anger. "She didn't steal us. She's been here our whole lives. She's taken care of us since I was 6 years old." Natalie turned to him, her arms outstretched. "Jacob, sweetheart, I know she's told you terrible things about me, but I've been looking for you both for so long. I've been searching everywhere. I never stopped loving you." Sophie started to cry. "Grandma?" I wanted to go to her, to hold her, but Gerald stepped between us. "I suggest you contact an attorney, Mrs. Clementine. We'll be filing formal charges and petitioning for immediate custody transfer. Given that you have no legal standing, I expect the court will rule swiftly." They left after that, but not before Natalie hugged both children. They stood stiff in her embrace, confused and scared. Sophie clung to me the second the door closed. Jacob paced the living room, his hands balled into fists. "Why is she saying those things?" Sophie asked between sobs. "Why is she lying?" I held her tight and tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to figure this out." 2 days later, there was another knock at my door. This time, it was Karen Walsh and Dennis Porter from Child Protective Services. They showed me their credentials and explained that they'd received a complaint about the children's living situation. My blood went cold. "A complaint? From who?" "We're not at liberty to say," Karen said. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a firm voice. "But we need to interview the children separately and conduct a home inspection. It's standard procedure." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to slam the door in their faces, but I knew that would only make things worse. So I let them in, showed them around, answered their questions, while my heart hammered against my ribs. They took Sophie into the kitchen first. Through the closed door, I could hear her crying. When it was Jacob's turn, he came out 20 minutes later looking pale and shaken. Dennis inspected the bedrooms, the bathrooms, checked the refrigerator and the smoke detectors and the locks on the windows. "Everything looks fine here," Karen said when they were done. "The home is clean and safe. The children are clearly well cared for." Relief flooded through me. "So that's it? You'll tell the court that everything's okay?" Karen and Dennis exchanged a look. "Mrs. Clementine, the children do seem healthy and happy, but there's the legal issue. You don't have formal custody. Without a legal custody arrangement, you've technically been acting as a guardian without proper authority." "But I'm their grandmother." "That doesn't automatically give you custody rights," Dennis said gently. "Especially when the biological mother still has parental rights. We have to follow protocol." They scheduled an emergency custody hearing for the following week. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table with my head in my hands, trying not to fall apart in front of Sophie and Jacob. That night, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter from Whitmore & Associates, the law firm representing Natalie. Attached to the letter were sworn statements from several people in town. I read them with growing horror. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down claimed she'd seen me yelling at the children in the yard. David Chen from the corner store said I always seemed overwhelmed and frustrated when I came in with them. Linda Martinez, who lived across the street, stated that she'd often heard the children crying late at night. None of it was true. Mrs. Patterson barely knew us. Mr. Chen was always friendly when we shopped there. And Linda Martinez had moved away 6 years ago. But the statements were notarized. They were official. They made me look like a stressed, angry woman who couldn't handle raising children. That's when I understood the full scope of what was happening. Natalie hadn't just shown up yesterday. She'd been in town for weeks, maybe months. She'd been talking to people, spinning stories, building a case against me. She'd planned this ambush carefully, and I'd walked right into her trap without even knowing it existed. I sat in my dark living room that night, listening to Sophie and Jacob sleeping upstairs, and felt more afraid than I'd ever been in my life. I spent the weekend looking for a lawyer I could afford, which basically meant a lawyer I couldn't afford. Most of the family law attorneys I called quoted fees of $5,000 or more just to start. I had maybe $800 in my checking account. Finally, on Monday morning, I contacted legal aid. They assigned me to Martin Hayes, a young attorney who looked like he'd graduated from law school about 15 minutes ago. We met at my kitchen table while the kids were at school. He had earnest brown eyes and a nervous habit of pushing his glasses up his nose. "Walk me through everything," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. So I did. I told him about the day Natalie left, about the 10 years of raising Sophie and Jacob alone, about how she'd shown up with a lawyer and a pack of lies. Martin took notes, nodding occasionally, but I could see the worry lines forming on his forehead. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mrs. Clementine, why didn't you ever file for formal custody?" The truth felt like failure. I couldn't afford it. The lawyer fees were thousands of dollars, and I thought she was gone forever. I never imagined she'd come back. Martin sighed and set down his pen. "I need to be honest with you. Legally, our position is very weak. You have no custody agreement, no legal guardianship, nothing in writing. You kept the children without formal authorization from the courts or from their mother. But she abandoned them. I believe you, but we'll need to prove that. And Natalie's clearly prepared to fight. Do you have any documentation from that time? Phone records, emails, anything that shows she left them with you and didn't come back?" I thought hard. "I filed a missing person report with the police, but they said it was lost in a computer system upgrade. I don't have my old phone records from 10 years ago. I never thought to keep any of that stuff. I didn't know I'd need proof." Martin's expression told me everything I needed to know. We were in trouble. The preliminary hearing was set for Thursday morning at the county family court. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I saved for funerals and important occasions. Martin met me outside the courtroom, carrying his briefcase and looking nervous. "Remember," he said quietly, "stay calm. Don't let them provoke you. Just answer the questions honestly." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Patricia Walsh sat behind the bench, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. Gerald Thompson was already there with Natalie, who'd transformed herself into someone I barely recognized. She wore a cream-colored suit with pearls. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup subtle and elegant. She looked successful, put together, stable. Next to her sat a man I'd never seen before, handsome in an unremarkable way, wearing an expensive watch. When Natalie took the stand, she didn't look at me once. Her testimony was smooth, practiced, devastating. "Your Honor, 10 years ago I was suffering from severe postpartum depression that went untreated for too long. I had what my doctors called a complete mental breakdown. I spent time in a residential treatment facility, trying to get better." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I reached out to my mother multiple times, but she wouldn't respond to my calls or letters. When I finally got out of treatment and tried to find my children, they were gone. She'd moved, changed her number, disappeared with them. I've been searching for Sophie and Jacob for years." Gerald Thompson presented evidence to support her story. Copies of letters supposedly sent to my old address that I'd never received. Phone records showing calls to a number that had never been mine. A document from a treatment facility in Michigan, dated from 11 years ago. "Miss Harrison has completely turned her life around," Gerald continued. "She's now employed as a pharmaceutical sales representative with an annual income of $65,000. She's remarried to David Sterling, a regional manager at Midwest Manufacturing. They have a 3-bedroom home in a good school district, with rooms already prepared for both children. She's stable, financially secure, and ready to provide her children with the life they deserve." When it was my turn to testify, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the witness box. Martin asked me to tell my side of the story. "Natalie showed up at my apartment 10 years ago and asked me to watch the kids for an hour. She never came back. Not that day, not the next day, not ever. Her apartment was cleaned out. Her phone was disconnected. She abandoned her children with me, and I raised them because somebody had to." "And you never filed for legal custody in all those years?" Gerald Thompson asked, when it was his turn to question me. "I couldn't afford it." "So you simply decided to keep someone else's children without any legal authority? Without even attempting to go through proper channels?" "They weren't someone else's children. They were my grandchildren, and their mother ran away. Judge Walsh's gavel came down. Mrs. Clementine, please watch your tone, Gerald continued, his voice smooth with false sympathy. Isn't it true that you told the children their mother was dead? No, I never said that. Isn't it true that you prevented Miss Harrison from having any contact with her children for the past decade? She didn't try to contact them. She disappeared. But I could see I was losing. Every answer I gave sounded defensive, emotional, desperate. Natalie sat at her table looking calm and sad and reasonable. Then Sophie and Jacob testified. The bailiff had to practically carry Sophie to the witness stand. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. I want to stay with Grandma, she sobbed. Please don't make us leave. Please. Jacob was more composed, but his voice shook. She's the only mother we've really known. We don't want to go with Natalie. We don't even know her. Gerald Thompson addressed the judge after they'd finished. Your Honor, this is a clear case of parental alienation. Mrs. Clementine has spent a decade turning these children against their biological mother. Of course they don't want to leave her. She's the only guardian they remember. But that doesn't change the fact that Miss Harrison is their legal mother with full parental rights, and those rights were violated. Judge Walsh took a long time reviewing the documents in front of her. The silence in that courtroom felt like drowning. Finally, she looked up. This is a complex situation, she said. However, I must consider several factors. Miss Harrison is the biological mother with no terminated parental rights. She has demonstrated stability and financial security. The children, while clearly attached to their grandmother, are not in any immediate danger. My heart stopped. Therefore, I'm issuing a temporary order. Physical custody of Sophie and Jacob Harrison will be transferred to Miss Natalie Harrison effective immediately, for a period of 60 days, while a full custody evaluation is conducted. During this time, Mrs. Clementine will be granted supervised visitation twice per week for 2 hours each visit. The rest of her words disappeared into a roaring in my ears. Sophie screamed. Jacob tried to run to me, but the bailiff held him back. I felt myself falling, and Martin caught my arm to keep me upright. That evening, a social worker came to the house. Her name was Amanda, and she was kind but firm as she helped Sophie and Jacob pack their belongings into garbage bags. They clung to me, both of them sobbing, begging not to go. It's okay, I kept saying, even though it wasn't, even though nothing was okay. It's just for a little while. I'll see you soon. I love you both so much. Amanda led them out to her car. I stood on my porch watching the taillights disappear down Maple Street, and I felt something inside me break so completely I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. The first week without them nearly killed me. I wandered through the house, touching their things. Sophie's hairbrush still had strands of her blonde hair in it. Jacob's basketball shoes sat by the back door. Their beds were still unmade from the morning they were taken away. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like sawdust. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophie's terrified face as they drove away. My friends from church tried to help. They brought casseroles I didn't touch, sat with me in my living room while I stared at nothing, told me to have faith and pray. I missed the first supervised visitation. Martin called me 3 times that morning, but I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't face those sterile family services offices, couldn't bear to see my grandchildren in that environment. By the time I finally answered the phone, it was too late. Martin's voice was sharp with worry. Clementine, you have to pull yourself together. If you miss visitations, the court will see it as abandonment. You'll lose even this. That got through to me. I dragged myself out of bed, took a shower, and promised him I'd make the next one. The Family Services Building was a squat brick structure on the east side of town. The visitation room was painted a cheerful yellow that felt like mockery. There were toys in the corner, children's books on a shelf, and a table with uncomfortable chairs where a social worker named Tracy sat taking notes the entire time. When Sophie and Jacob arrived, my heart cracked all over again. They looked exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes. Sophie had lost weight in just 1 week. Jacob's shoulders were hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. They were wearing new clothes I'd never seen, expensive brands from stores we'd never shopped at. Sophie's hair was cut shorter, styled in a way she'd never worn it. Jacob's usual wild curls were gelled down flat. They ran to me, and we held each other so tight, I thought we might fuse together. Sophie wouldn't let go of my hand. Jacob kept his arm around me the whole 2 hours. "We hate it there," Sophie whispered, when Tracy looked down at her paperwork. "She's different when David's around. When he leaves for work." "No discussing the placement during visitation," Tracy interrupted, her pen poised over her notes. Jacob leaned close to my ear. "Grandma, she said she's going to move us to California. David got a job offer there. If we leave Ohio, we'll never see you." My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's not going to happen. We're going to fix this." But I didn't know if that was true. The 2 hours flew by too fast. When Tracy said time was up, both children clung to me, crying. Tracy had to gently pull them away. I stood in that parking lot watching them drive off again, and I felt more helpless than I'd ever felt in my entire life. That night, Martin came to my house with news. He'd been doing background research on Natalie, and what he'd found made my stomach turn. "She's not really a pharmaceutical sales rep," he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "She's between jobs, and has been for the past 8 months. David Sterling is her 3rd husband in 8 years. And there's more." He pulled out another document. "Do you know about the trust fund?" I shook my head. "What trust fund?" "Sophie and Jacob's biological father, Natalie's ex-husband, died 7 years ago in a car accident. He had a life insurance policy that established a trust for the children. It's worth approximately $400,000. Jacob can access his portion when he turns 18, which is in 2 years. Sophie gets hers at 21. The pieces clicked together in my mind. She's not back for the children, she's back for the money. As their legal guardian, she'd control those funds until they reach adulthood, Martin said. She could make withdrawals for their care and education. Given her financial situation, that money would solve a lot of problems for her. We tried to present this information to the court, but Gerald Thompson blocked us at every turn. He filed a motion arguing that it was speculation and character assassination. Then he filed another motion to reduce my visitation, claiming I was using the visits to manipulate the children against their mother. His evidence was Tracy's notes, which stated that Sophie and Jacob became emotionally dysregulated after seeing me. Of course they were upset. They were traumatized children being forced to live with a stranger. But Judge Walsh agreed to a hearing on the motion. And then things got worse. More people from town came forward with statements supporting Natalie. Mrs. Ellen Cooper, who used to be on the school board, claimed she'd always thought I was possessive of the children, that I'd pushed Natalie out of their lives years ago. Mr. Raymond Blake from the hardware store said I'd seemed overwhelmed and angry whenever he saw me with them. These were people I'd known for years. People who'd smiled at me in church, who'd chatted with me at the grocery store. And now they were testifying against me, painting me as an unstable woman who'd stolen children to fill some void in her own life. I realized Natalie had been more thorough than I'd thought. She'd spent months in town before showing up at my door, talking to people, spinning her story, turning my entire community against me. She'd built a case so carefully that I was trapped from every angle. The hearing on the visitation motion was scheduled for a Friday morning. Martin and I sat at our table while Gerald presented his arguments. Then Judge Walsh spoke, and her words felt like a death sentence. "I'm very concerned about the emotional state of these children. The reports indicate that they're experiencing significant distress related to the visitation schedule. While I understand that transitions are difficult, I need to consider what's in their best interest long term." She paused, looking at me over her glasses. "I'm considering terminating Mrs. Clementine's visitation entirely and making Miss Harrison's custody permanent. However, I'm willing to give Mrs. Clementine one final opportunity." My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. "We'll have one final hearing in 2 weeks. At that hearing, Mrs. Clementine, must present compelling evidence as to why custody should be reconsidered. If she cannot do so, I will grant Mrs. Clementine Harrison permanent full custody, with no visitation rights for the grandmother. Martin pulled me aside after court adjourned. His face was grim. Clementine, we need something concrete. Do you have anything at all, that proves your side of the story? Because right now, we're going to lose. I went home to my empty house and felt the weight of complete defeat. I'd lost everything, my money, my time, my community's support. And now, I was about to lose Sophie and Jacob forever. I spent the next 3 days tearing my house apart looking for something, anything that could help. Old phone bills, photographs, receipts, any scrap of proof from 10 years ago. I found pictures of the children through the years, school reports, birthday cards I'd saved, but none of it proved that Natalie had abandoned them. It only proved I'd raised them, which no one was disputing. I called everyone I could think of who might have known Natalie back then. Her old friend Jessica had moved to Florida. Her former co-worker Mark didn't want to get involved. The neighbor who'd lived below her apartment was dead. Every lead went nowhere. Mr. Patterson, the landlord, couldn't help. His records from that far back were long gone, thrown out in a move 5 years ago. The police station had lost my missing person report when they upgraded their computer system. Every door I tried to open was already locked. The third supervised visitation was the worst. Sophie had lost more weight. She looked frail, her clothes hanging loose on her thin frame. Jacob's hands shook when he reached for me. He kept glancing at the door like he expected someone to burst in. "Are you eating?" I asked Sophie quietly, trying not to alarm Tracy. "Not hungry," Sophie whispered. "Jacob, what's going on? Tell me the truth." He looked at Tracy, then back at me. "She's really nice when David's home. She makes dinner, talks to us about school, acts like a regular mom. But when he leaves..." "No discussing the placement," Tracy said sharply. Later, when Tracy left the room to take a phone call, Sophie pressed something into my hand. It was a small piece of notebook paper folded tiny. "Don't open it here," she breathed. I slipped it into my pocket. The rest of the visit passed in a blur. When they were gone, I went to my car and unfolded the note with shaking hands. In Sophie's careful handwriting. "She hits us when we talk about you. Please save us, Grandma. Please." I drove straight to the family services office. I showed the note to Tracy, to her supervisor, to anyone who would listen. "You have to investigate this. You have to protect them." They took the note seriously at first. An investigation was opened. But then I got a call 2 days later from Tracy's supervisor, a man named Richard Paulson. "Mrs. Leah, Clementine, we interviewed both children separately. They both denied writing any note. They said they don't know what you're talking about." "What? That's impossible. Sophie wrote it. She gave it to me." We also spoke with Miss Harrison. She's very concerned about these allegations. She believes you may have fabricated the note in an attempt to discredit her. "I didn't fabricate anything. Why would they deny it unless they're afraid?" "Without the children corroborating your claim, there's nothing we can investigate. I strongly advise you to stop making unfounded accusations. It's not helping your case." That night, Martin came over. We sat at my kitchen table, and he looked more defeated than I felt. "I don't think we can win this, Clementine. I've gone over everything 100 times. We have no documentation, no proof, no witnesses. Natalie has legal rights, financial stability, and a community that supports her story. The judge is ready to rule against us. So what are you saying? I should just give up?" "I'm saying maybe supervised visitation is better than nothing. Maybe in a few years, when the kids are older, they can make their own choices about where to live. They're being hurt right now. I can't wait a few years. Then what do you want me to do?" Martin's frustration boiled over. "I've done everything I can. We don't have a case." After he left, I sat alone in my dark kitchen. The house felt enormous and empty without Sophie and Jacob. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second like a hammer strike against my heart. I thought about running, taking the kids and disappearing somewhere Natalie would never find us. But that would make me the kidnapper she'd always claimed I was, and if I got caught, I'd go to jail. Then who would protect them? My sister Jennifer called from Arizona. She'd been following the case, worried sick about me. "You need to accept reality," she said gently. "Sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes you lose." "I can't lose them, Jen. They're everything." "I know. But you might not have a choice." After we hung up, I went upstairs to their empty bedrooms. Sophie's stuffed animals were lined up on her bed just the way she liked them. Jacob's model airplanes hung from the ceiling on fishing line. I sat on the floor between their rooms and cried until I had nothing left. That's when it came to me. A memory from 10 years ago, fuzzy at first, then sharpening into focus. That first week after Natalie left, I'd gone back to her empty apartment. Not just once, but several times, desperate for any clue about where she'd gone. The last time I went, there was mail stacked up by the door. The landlord hadn't bothered collecting it. I'd taken it with me, thinking maybe there'd be something important, some forwarding address or contact information. I remembered going through it at my kitchen table. Bills, catalogs, junk mail, and something else. Something that had made my hands shake when I'd opened it. I went to my bedroom and opened my closet. On the top shelf, pushed to the very back, was a dusty shoebox. I pulled it down and dumped the contents on my bed. Old receipts, expired warranties, random papers I'd kept for no good reason. And there, at the bottom, was a yellowed envelope marked "Urgent." Legal documents. I opened it with trembling fingers and pulled out the papers inside. As I read them, everything changed. There were 3 documents, all notarized and dated from the week before Natalie left the children with me. The first was a letter written in Natalie's handwriting on legal letterhead. "To whom it may. Concern, I, Natalie Marie Harrison, am permanently surrendering custody of my children, Sophie Lynn Harrison and Jacob Michael Harrison, to my mother, Clementine Rose Mitchell. I cannot provide for them adequately. I am leaving the state of Ohio for good and will not be returning. I request that my mother be granted full legal guardianship, signed and notarized March 10th. The second document was a bank withdrawal slip from Children's First Bank. It showed that Natalie had cashed out the entire life insurance policy from Jacob and Sophie's father, $25,000 that was supposed to be held in trust for their care. She'd taken every penny 3 days before she disappeared. The third document was the most damaging. It was a handwritten letter, 2 pages long, dated the day before she left the children with me. I read it again slowly, my heart pounding. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you found what I left at the apartment. I need you to know the truth, even though I'm too much of a coward to say it to your face. I have a serious drug problem. Cocaine, pills, whatever I can get, I've been using for 3 years. Child Protective Services opened an investigation last month after Jacob's teacher reported bruises. They're going to take the kids away from me. I'm not getting clean. I can't get clean. I'm not strong enough. So I'm running before they can officially remove my children and put it all on record. At least this way there won't be a paper trail following them forever. I know I'm a terrible mother. I know I'm abandoning them. But you'll take care of them. You always do. Please don't tell them what I really am. Let them remember me as someone who loved them, not as this. Keep them safe. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for failing. I'm sorry for being weak. But at least with you, they'll have a chance. Natalie." The papers shook in my hands. All this time, these documents had been sitting in my closet. Legal proof that Natalie had voluntarily given up her children. Proof that she'd stolen their money. Proof that she'd confessed to drug abuse and admitted to running from CPS. I'd hidden them because I didn't want Sophie and Jacob to ever see them. I wanted to protect them from knowing what their mother really was, from understanding how completely she'd failed them. I thought I was doing the right thing by preserving some kinder image of her. But now Natalie had forced my hand. She'd come back after 10 years with lies and lawyers, trying to take my children away. Not because she loved them, not because she'd changed, but because of money, because of a trust fund she could drain. I called Martin at 11 o'clock at night. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "This better be important." "I found them," I said. "I found the documents. The proof. Everything we need." He was at my house 20 minutes later, still in his pajamas with a coat thrown over them. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, and he read them under the harsh fluorescent light. His eyes got wider with each page. When he finished, he looked at me with something like awe. "This is it. This is exactly what we needed. These are notarized, dated, legally binding documents. Why didn't you show me these before?" I told him the truth. I didn't want the children to know. I wanted them to believe their mother had loved them. I wanted to protect her memory. "She's trying to take them away from you." "I know. And now I don't have a choice." We worked through the night preparing our case. Martin called a notary expert he knew, woke her up, and got her to verify the documents were authentic. We drafted our motion to present new evidence. We built our strategy. As the sun came up over Ohio, Martin looked at me across my kitchen table and said, "We're going to win this." For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it might be true. The final hearing was set for Tuesday morning. Martin filed our emergency motion to present new evidence on Monday afternoon, just under the wire. Gerald Thompson immediately objected, arguing it was too late, but Judge Walsh allowed it. The courtroom was more crowded than before. Word had gotten around that something big was happening. I saw neighbors I'd known for years sitting in the gallery, their faces curious and judgmental. Mrs. Patterson was there, Mr. Chen. Even Linda Martinez had come back to town for this. Natalie arrived looking perfect as always. Her suit was designer, her makeup flawless. David sat next to her, his arm around her shoulders in a show of support. She looked confident, like she'd already won. Gerald Thompson's opening statement was smooth and practiced. He painted Natalie as a reformed woman, someone who'd fought her way back from darkness and deserved a second chance with her children. He talked about the beautiful home waiting for them in California, the opportunities they'd have, the stable family life. Then Natalie took the stand. She told her story again, the same version she'd been telling all along. The breakdown, the treatment, the desperate search for her children. She cried at all the right moments. She spoke about how much she'd changed, how therapy had saved her, how meeting David had given her the strength to keep fighting. "I made mistakes," she said, looking directly at Judge Walsh. "I was sick, but I'm better now. I'm ready to be the mother Sophie and Jacob deserve. I'm ready to give them everything I couldn't give them before." It was a good performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her. When Gerald finished with her, Judge Walsh called a brief recess. During those 15 minutes, I saw Gerald and Natalie arguing in the hallway. Their voices were low but intense. Gerald's face was red. Natalie kept shaking her head, gesturing sharply with her hands. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see that something had rattled them. When court reconvened, Martin called me to the stand. My legs felt weak as I walked up there and sat down. Martin gave me an encouraging nod. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've heard Miss Harrison's testimony about the events 10 years ago. Do you have anything to add?" I took a breath and told my story. Not the sanitized version this time, the whole truth. How Natalie had shown up looking desperate and strung out, how she'd left and never come back, how her apartment was already empty when I went to check on her, how I'd spent 10 years raising those children on my own, pouring every penny and every ounce of love I had into them. "I never wanted to take them from her," I said. "I wanted her to come back. For years I hoped she'd come back clean and sober and ready to be their mother. But she never did. Until now. Until there was money involved." Gerald objected, but Judge Walsh overruled him. Martin approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence that directly contradicts Miss Harrison's testimony." He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who brought it to Judge Walsh. The courtroom went silent as she opened it and began to read. I watched her face change as she went through the documents. Her eyes narrowed. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence stretched out so long I thought I might scream. Finally, Judge Walsh looked up at Natalie. "Miss Harrison, did you write this letter?" Natalie's confidence cracked. "That was a long time ago. I was sick. I didn't mean." "Did you sign this document stating you were permanently surrendering custody of your children to your mother?" "I was not in my right mind when I—" "Did you? Or did you not sign it?" Natalie looked at Gerald. He was staring at the documents, his face pale. "Your Honor," he began, but Judge Walsh cut him off with a gesture. "Mr. Thompson, did you know about these documents when you filed your custody petition?" My client assured me there was no paperwork," she said. "So you did not know." Judge Walsh's voice was ice. She turned back to Natalie. "Miss Harrison, this document is notarized. It's legally binding. You voluntarily surrendered custody of your children 10 years ago. I want to take it back. I want my children back." "That's not how it works." Judge Walsh rifled through the other papers. Her face grew darker as she read. "And this bank record shows you withdrew $25,000 from your children's trust fund? Money that was designated for their care?" Gerald stood up. "Your Honor, these documents are over a decade old. They're notarized and legal, Mr. Thompson. And they directly contradict every statement your client has made under oath in this courtroom." She paused, then added, "I'm calling a 15-minute recess." The recess felt like hours. I sat with Martin, my hands clasped so tight they hurt. Through the window in the door, I could see Gerald and Natalie in the hallway. Their argument had escalated. Gerald was gesturing angrily. Natalie was crying, but not the pretty, controlled tears from before. These were real, desperate tears. "You told me you never signed anything," I heard Gerald shout, his voice carrying through the closed door. "You said there was no paperwork. You made me look like a fool in there." Natalie's response was muffled, but I caught fragments. "I forgot, Dot, it was so long ago. I was high when I signed them." When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Walsh had a different look on her face, cold, disgusted. "I've made some calls during the recess," she announced. "Mr. Thompson, did you know your client has 2 arrests for drug possession in California over the past 5 years? Gerald's face went white. She told me she'd resolved all legal issues. She's currently on probation. She lied on her custody petition about her criminal record. Judge Walsh looked at Natalie with open contempt. "Miss Harrison, you came into my courtroom and testified under oath that you'd been searching for your children for 10 years. You claimed you'd tried to contact them. You painted yourself as a reformed woman who'd turned her life around. But these documents prove you voluntarily abandoned your children and stole money that was meant for their care. Your criminal record shows you haven't changed at all." Natalie tried to speak, but no words came out. Judge Walsh picked up the confession letter and read aloud. "Let them remember me as someone who loved them, not as this." She looked at me. "Mrs. Mitchell, these documents detail very painful information about the children's mother. Do they know about this?" My voice shook when I answered. "Not yet, Your Honor. I never wanted them to know. I wanted to protect their memory of her." The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Judge Walsh set the letter down carefully. "You kept these documents hidden for 10 years to spare your daughter's children from pain. And she came back into your life with false accusations and tried to take those children away from you." She turned to Natalie. "Miss Harrison, your custody petition is denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented in your criminal record, I'm reversing my previous temporary order. Full legal guardianship of Sophie Lynn Harrison and Jacob Michael Harrison is granted to Mrs. Clementine Rose Mitchell, effective immediately." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. "Your visitation rights are hereby suspended pending completion of a certified drug treatment program and psychological evaluation," Judge Walsh continued. "When and if you complete those requirements, we can revisit limited supervised visitation. But you will not have custody of these children. Do you understand?" Natalie broke down completely. She tried to stand, to approach the bench, but her legs gave out. David helped her back into her chair. Gerald Thompson gathered his papers without a word and left the courtroom, his face burning with humiliation. Martin grabbed my hand. "You won," he whispered. "It's over. You won." But I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt numb, exhausted, empty. Judge Walsh's gavel came down. "This court is adjourned." The social workers brought Sophie and Jacob back to my house that same afternoon. I was standing in my kitchen making their favorite dinner when I heard the car pull up. I ran to the door, my heart pounding. They tumbled out of the social worker's car and ran to me. We collided on the front porch in a tangle of arms and tears. Sophie was sobbing. Jacob held on so tight I could barely breathe. We stood there for what felt like forever, just holding each other. "Are we really staying?" Sophie asked, her face pressed against my shoulder. "Forever this time?" "Forever," I promised. "No one's taking you away from me again. Ever." That night, we sat around our kitchen table, eating spaghetti and meatballs. It was the first real meal Sophie had eaten in weeks. Jacob ate 3 helpings. We talked about school, about their friends, about normal everyday things. We didn't talk about Natalie or the court or any of it. Not yet. Later, after they'd gone to bed, Sophie came back downstairs. She stood in the doorway of the living room, looking small and scared. "Grandma, what happened with Natalie? What made the judge change her mind?" This was the moment I'd been dreading. I patted the couch next to me, and she curled up against my side like she used to when she was little. "Your mother was very sick 10 years ago," I said carefully. "She made choices she couldn't take back. She wrote some things down, explained why she left you with me. The judge saw those papers, and she understood the truth. Was it bad, what she wrote? Some of it was hard to read. But your mother did one thing right. She made sure you were safe with me. In her own way, that was love." Sophie was quiet for a long time. "Do we have to see her again?" "Not unless you want to. Not for a long time, maybe not ever. That's up to you and Jacob when you're older." "I don't think I want to." "Is that bad?" I kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart. That's not bad. That's honest." The weeks that followed were about healing. Martin helped me finalize the legal guardianship papers. We set up the trust fund properly so it was protected for the kids' futures. We even filed for back child support from Natalie, though I knew we'd never see a penny. The principle mattered more than the money. Sophie's appetite came back. The dark circles under her eyes faded. Jacob's hands stopped shaking. They both started sleeping through the night again. We went back to our routines: school, homework, dinner together, movie nights on Fridays. I enrolled them in family therapy. A kind woman named Dr. Susan Martinez helped them process everything that had happened. Some sessions they came out smiling. Other times they came out crying. But slowly, piece by piece, they started to heal. One Saturday morning, about 3 months after the final hearing, Jacob and I were working in the garden when he said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That envelope you showed the judge. Was it really that bad?" I sat back on my heels and looked at him. He was 16 now, nearly a man, tall and strong. He deserved some version of the truth. "Your mother was struggling with addiction. She was scared. She knew she couldn't take care of you the way you deserved, so she made sure you were with someone who could. That took a kind of courage, even if it doesn't feel like it. She came back for the money, didn't she? The trust fund from my dad. I'd always known Jacob was smart." "Yes." He nodded slowly, processing. "At least we know now. At least it's not a mystery anymore." That was the gift, I realized. The truth, as painful as it was, had set us all free. 6 months later, we had Thanksgiving at our house. My sister Jennifer flew in from Arizona. Martin came with his wife. Some friends from church joined us. Our table was crowded and loud and full of life. Before we ate, Sophie and Jacob stood up. "We want to say something," Sophie announced. My heart clenched, not sure what was coming. "Grandma," Jacob said, his voice steady, "we know everything you gave up for us. We know you spent your savings, gave up your retirement, worked extra jobs. We know you could have turned us away 10 years ago, but you didn't." Sophie picked up where he left off. "You fought for us when no one else would. You protected us even when it cost you everything. You're not just our grandmother, you're our mom in every way that matters." They came around the table and hugged me from both sides. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. Jennifer was crying. Martin was wiping his eyes. "We love you," they said together. "I love you both more than anything in this world," I managed to say. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were done, an envelope arrived in the mail. California postmark. I recognized the handwriting. Sophie and Jacob were upstairs doing homework. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "Mom, I completed the treatment program. I've been sober for 4 months. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed any right I had to be part of their lives. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Maybe someday, if they ever want to know me, I'll be someone worth knowing. Thank you for saving them when I couldn't. Thank you for being the mother I never was. Natalie." I folded the letter and put it in my drawer. Maybe someday I'd show it to Sophie and Jacob. Maybe someday they'd want to reach out to her. But that would be their choice, made when they were ready. For now, we had each other. We had our home, our routines, our life together. We had survived the worst and come out stronger. I thought about all those months of fear, of fighting, of nearly losing everything. I thought about that envelope I'd hidden away, the truth I'd protected for so long. In the end, the truth had saved us. But so had love. So had showing up every single day for 10 years. So had refusing to give up, even when everything seemed lost. I'd learned something through all of this. Sometimes, protecting someone's memory, keeping their secrets, trying to spare others from pain, can actually cause more harm. The truth, even when it hurts, is what sets you free. And family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. As I sat in my kitchen listening to Sophie and Jacob laughing upstairs, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. We'd been through fire and come out the other side. We'd faced the worst and survived it together. That's what family does. That's what love does. It endures. It fights. It wins. And we had won. Finally, truly, we had won. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against impossible odds? Have you ever had to reveal a painful truth to protect the people who matter most? How did you find the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and know they're not alone in their struggles. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through. And please share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's fighting their own battle and needs to know that truth and love can prevail. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're facing, you know that you're stronger than you think. You're braver than you believe. And you're never, ever alone. God bless you all. Take care of each other. And remember, family is what you make it.